Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Stacy Laterman, and I am the senior producer at See3 Communications. I have been working in video production for the past 10 years, and I've been with See3 for 5 years, making videos for nonprofits. Right now, you should be seeing my opening screen, which is the Jewish Day School Video Academy production slide. This is the second webinar of 4. Last week you heard Michael Hoffman speak about storytelling, and today we are going to talk about how to implement that storytelling. If you have any comments or want to ask questions, use the chat function in your GoToWebinar software. First off, I just want to say thank you all for joining us. This is the Jewish Day School Video Academy, sponsored by the AVI CHAI Foundation. And I'd like to say thank you to the AVI CHAI Foundation as well for their support of the day school community, and we'll talk about the elements in this program, but it truly is a tremendous thing that AVI CHAI is doing. Again, this is the second of 4 webinars, 4 learning webinars. You can learn a lot more about this whole program at the dayschoolvideoacademy.org, and I'll post this link at the end. The Day School Video Academy has 3 main elements. The first are these 4 training webinars. They are every consecutive Tuesday, and each of these webinars are being recorded and will be posted to the Video Academy website the following day, so you'll be able to share with your colleagues and other members of your community who were unable to attend the webinar. The next webinar is going to be post-production, how to edit your story together. And this webinar is going to be a 90-minute one. We are going to have a 10-minute break in between, but there's a lot to cover, so it's a little bit longer than the others. The following one is going to be on distribution. So what do you do with these videos once you make them? We'll be covering in distribution. I also want to mention that this webinar and the one next week will also be up by Wednesday morning, so you can share before the holidays. The second part of the Academy is consulting. We'll be offering one-to-one consultation with experts in video production and distribution, which can be done through the phone or email. For more information about the consulting, you can go to the Video Academy website, just like for the slides and everything else. And the last part of the Academy is a video contest where we will be giving away entry prizes of a flip video camera and also a grand prize of $10,000. So we hope everyone takes what they learned from these webinars and enters the video contest for a chance to win. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Introduction to production. What exactly is production? Production is where you gather all the images and engage your subjects to spring into action. Depending on the approach you're taking, production can mean different things. This can be a one-shot ordeal. This can be something that you do several takes of. It all depends on how you're going to tell your story. But the production isn't the prep up to the production. That's pre-production when you find your subjects. Production is the actual filming of the event. I want to quickly recap what you learned in last week's webinar. It's really important to understand that all these webinars do go together: pre-production, production, post-production, and distribution. You cannot have one without the other. Production is dependent on pre-production, and same with post. You prep so you can get the best out of the 5 hours you have filming your subject, if that's the case. So, to recap, in pre-production, you're going to select your characters. You're going to decide if you're following a student or a teacher or an alumni or a parent. Find who really articulates the message you want to share. Sometimes you'll want to do pre-interviews with your subjects to make sure that they can really speak to what you want them to talk about. I think most of you will probably be working with people that you already know, so this pre-interviews aren't always necessary, but they're a good thing to do. And when I mean pre-interview, this doesn't mean you have to bring a camera with you. It can just be face-to-face over the phone, just to get a feel for what they're going to talk about. Make sure to scout your locations. Again, where are you filming? What do the backdrops look like that you're going to be filming at? Are you filming at a school? Are you filming at a synagogue? Are you filming at a park? If you're filming at the park, is it going to rain that day? What time of day do you want to be there? Is there softball going on, which is going to be distracting in the background, and you can't ask people to stop their softball game? These are all things you should do before you just go over there with a camera. Release forms, we spoke a little bit about this last week, but if you do not have a blanket release form for all the students. You should have the parents sign a release form for them. Also, parents, alumni, teachers might not fall within that blanket release, so you should get releases from them. There's more on the information on this on our website as well. Your shot list. What are you planning to shoot besides interviews? What is going to help show what you're trying to say rather than tell what you want to say? Are you shooting a wide shot of the school? Are you shooting a shot of the hallway to show how big the school is? In the classroom, do you want to shoot a scene of a teacher reading a book? What shots do you have to shoot to make that scene? And we're going to cover this towards the end of the webinar today, so I don't want to go too much into detail, but remember, when you look at documentary and you look at verite work, a lot of it seems spontaneous, but a lot of it is also planned out because filmmakers go in knowing what they want to capture. You want to go ahead and write your interview questions down before you go and interview your subjects. You don't want to be jotting them down right in front of them or not. For me, the big thing about writing interview questions is that sometimes someone starts telling me an interesting story and I want to know more details about it, but then I realize I'm getting way off subject and what they're saying isn't relevant to what my video needs to say. So I got to refer back to those questions, have a list, have a set agenda of what we should talk about. Also, sometimes I find it helpful when I'm writing interview questions to write the responses I want to hear. So that way, if the person isn't saying the sentence I am hoping to hear, something along the lines of, I love teaching at this school because all of my students are engaged and love to learn, something along those lines, I'll ask the person to repeat it. And we'll talk about how to conduct an interview today as well, but the questions technically fall in pre-production. Determine your crew and your gear. A lot of the participants on the webinar today will be shooting on what we call one-man band style. It's going to be you and a camera and you and audio gear. But if there can be two of you, that's more ideal. There's a lot to think about when you're filming, and you're going to realize that as we go through the presentation today. So having someone that can operate the camera and someone who can be the producer to maintain the relationships, look around them, think about what else needs to be captured, and just an extra set of hands is good. If you have the luxury of a 3-person crew, even better. Someone to focus on sound, someone to focus on camera, and someone to produce. It's also important to know this in advance instead of deciding at the last minute you're going to do it by yourself, because in that way you can mentally prepare yourself for everything you need to focus on. Okay, so what elements go into production? There's obviously the equipment. What are you going to be using to film your subject? There's the technical knowledge, the basics of how you work the camera and the sound gear. The more you practice on this and the more knowledge you have behind it, the more comfortable you'll feel when you're actually shooting. You won't feel distracted about, oh, how do I focus? How do I set my white balance? Because you'll already know. You can spend the moment engaging with your character and shooting the best story rather than working out these minute technical details. And we're going to talk about those today as well. The ability to visually tell a story. What are you going to shoot? Again, this goes into the shot list. You need to know how you want to show your story. And organization, making sure you have a good production schedule lined out, making sure you tell people, oh, I'm going to need 2 hours in your space. Is it okay if I have this room? Or being organized with where you keep your releases and telling your crew where you want them to work and everything. So organization and everything is key. It just makes everything run smoothly. And the one thing I think everyone here should walk away with today, out of all these webinars actually, is that the most important thing is the story you tell, not the tools you use to tell it. It used to be that video and filmmaking was just for the professionals, for the people that could afford it and get the funding for the tools. But with the internet and flip video cameras and still cameras being able to shoot video, this has changed. It's revolutionized the way that we look at media and the way that we tell stories, and what has become acceptable and what's different. It's about the story. It's not always about the pretty image anymore. And we're getting to hear a lot of different voices and hear a lot of different perspectives now because of this. And it's truly remarkable and wonderful that everyone here has the opportunity to make their own video and not have to pay too much money for it. So I'm sure a lot of you on the webinar today are wondering, what gear are you going to need? I want to do a quick poll to see right now if you have a camera, and if so, what kind. So we're going to go ahead and post that poll question. It looks like almost half of you are using flips, which is good. So I'm going to talk about flip cameras, but I'm also going to talk about what does a professional camera mean and what does a prosumer camera mean. So the first bullet point here is tape versus tapeless. If you're shooting on a flip camera, you have a tapeless workflow. But tape workflow literally means shooting on tape, no matter what format it is, if it's standard def, high 8, or mini DV, HD, DV cam. These are all things you've seen probably in Best Buy ads. They're just referring to that's a tape format. Tapeless is when you shoot on a memory or an SD card. Most of you who are shooting on the flip, the memory's inside, so you're limited to how much you can shoot on the camera before you have to back up and dump the media. But other flip type cameras do sometimes come with expandable SD card slots. The reason I'm talking about this is because it's important to know how much memory and tape space you need before you go to your shoot. So there is no better here, tape versus tapeless. They're pretty much the same, but the trend right now is going to tapeless because it's cheaper, reusable, and has a faster workflow in post-production. Knowing how many tapes or memory cards you will need is dependent on the format you're shooting, the size, and the bit rate in your camera. The camera documentation that comes with your camera should give you an idea of how many hours you can record up to given the size of the card. You can go to www.videospaceonline.com. There's a conversion calculator there that will also help you figure out how much space you think you're going to need, and if you need to bring a laptop to back up to during the day. Consumer versus professional. I want to preface this by saying that I know we have a variety of participants, so I just want to address the difference in cameras and what they're able to do. Once you become comfortable with a flip type camera and mastered it, you'll more than likely want to have more control of your images. So this is just to give you a taste of where you can go, but is by no means necessary at all. So consumer cameras have a limited set of options for controlling picture and sound. Generally, they shoot at a lower bit rate. What is bit rate? It is the amount of color and brightness data that is stored for each frame that your camera captures. So it works like this. If you have a higher bit rate, you have more information about that frame. This is why sometimes consumer cameras will look grainier in low light conditions, and sometimes you can see digital breakup. Moving forward, this is why it's important to also keep your shooting surroundings in mind, because you may have limited control, but you can learn how to work around that and produce a great image. And we're going to look at some examples of those later on in the presentation. The other big difference between pro and consumer is the type of audio gear you can use. Most consumer cameras are either restricted to their internal sound recording hardware or have limited ability to attach external gear. Another difference is the lens. Any cinematographer will tell you your image is only as good as your lens, and most consumer cameras have small, inexpensive fixed lenses. I don't necessarily agree with this. We're not shooting big Hollywood films here. Most of this is for internal communications. It'll be showed on a big screen maybe at one event, but I don't think you should feel limited by your lenses. But I'm saying it for people out there who have done photography before and might have a little more knowledge, and I'm acknowledging to you that yes, lenses can make a difference, but for what we're doing, it's not always necessary. So one other big trend right now that you've probably heard about or other people have talked about to you is DSLRs that shoot video. These are a growing trend because you can choose the lenses you want to shoot with. They're inexpensive bodies for the camera, but the lenses can be very expensive. DSLRs come with a slew of other issues that make filming and post-production complicated. One is all the settings are different, and you're going to get caught up in what lens does what, how do you do these settings, and you are limited to how much you can actually shoot at a time in a take on your memory card. The second is it doesn't capture audio, and you have to capture audio on a separate device, which can open up a slew of issues in post, including synchronizing your sound with your picture. There is a software that does this. It's called Pluralize. We can post a link to it, but if you've never dealt with filmmaking before, It would be great to explore maybe on a flip camera, and then you can work your way up to a DSLR. If you can afford or have access to a professional camera, go for it. But just remember, this is complicated just like the DSLR, and sometimes when you're focusing on story, it's best to work with tools that are set to automatic. But by no means do I want to discourage anyone. It's all what you are comfortable with. I just got a question about what are the pros and cons of having students work on the crew, high school or middle school? This is a really good question, and I don't want to spend too much time on it because we have a lot to cover, and I encourage whoever sent that question out to sign up and talk to me about it. The thing is you're having to educate yourself and then educate a student, and depending on what video you are making, that can be good or bad. If it's something you have to get out the door quickly and it's going to be going to high-end donors, you might want to be doing that yourself. But if you're making a video about why students love the school, yeah, and have them involved in the project because it's going to be from their voice and their perspective. And a lot of students already out there know how to use cameras, but just make sure when you're directing them, or if you see something that you don't like, that you learn how to communicate with them about how to change an image. Okay, so moving on to understanding your camera settings. Let's start with resolution. What is resolution? Resolution is the size of a recorded picture in pixels. So you hear a lot about people saying, oh, I want HD because it's a better resolution. That's not always the case in web video. I know everyone is encouraged to make a variety of videos in terms of, is it for your large fundraising event you're going to be showing on a large screen, or are you making a quick and dirty video about one of your new teachers that you want to highlight and post it to the website so the parents can meet them? If it's that situation, if you're shooting on something that's a lower resolution, it's okay. So this is why it's okay to have these other types of cameras. Just to give you an example, I know everyone's going to be looking on different monitors, but this here that says 720 versus 1080, you can see the 720, the pixels are bigger. So the Mona Lisa looks kind of like a big blur if you weren't wearing glasses. Where in the 1080, the pixels are smaller and more crisp. So you can start to see who the Mona Lisa is. The funny thing about this slide is that all of you are on computer screens with different resolutions, so it's going to look different to everyone. Unless you're on a 1080 monitor, you're not going to really see all the difference. Another setting that your camera might allow you to choose is the frame rate. The number of frames per second that your camera captures is the framework. Traditional video is 30 frames per second, and film is 24 frames per second. Some cameras give you the option of which one you want to choose, and the only difference is how many frames it's capturing and what the look will look like. So if you can get 24 frames per second, we recommend that you choose that option because it will have more of a filmatic look. Bitrate. We talked a little bit about what bitrate is, but in a consumer camera, you'll have some options that say extended play, which the abbreviation is EP, long play, which is LP, or standard play, which is SP. And you'll say, I don't know which one I'm supposed to choose. I never know which one to choose. So the higher the bitrate, the less footage you can fit on your storage, and that's the trade-off. So if I pick extended play, it's going to capture more information, and ultimately it's going to look better if I'm shooting a video that's going to be projected on a large screen. Again, if you have to get a lot of interviews in one day and you don't have a lot of memory and this is quick and dirty and going up on the internet, then you can do standard play, and it's just as good. So those options aren't the end of the world if you don't know which one to choose. But the one important thing to learn about all of these is that you stay consistent with the settings that you choose. You'll learn quickly from Josh, who's the presenter next week, that when it comes to editing, timelines want consistency. So if you're choosing extended play and you're shooting 720p, the next time you go to edit, you don't want to choose 1080 and standard play. You always want to make sure those settings are consistent, and that goes back to working with students. If you have a variety of students working on a project, it's your job as producer to write down what is the standard that you're shooting in. Okay, moving on. You also, if you have the ability to use external audio, need some sound gear. You'll see here there are two options, well, three options for sound. There's a lavalier microphone, which is that little clip microphone you see sometimes clipped to people when they're doing an interview. This is a good option when you're doing a sit-down interview or if you're following someone, because they'll always have a microphone attached to them, and it's close to them. The shotgun microphone, which is to the side, is what we call a directional microphone. This microphone is designed to capture the audio in front of it, and it can be monitored through your camera, and if you put it on a boom, if you see in film sometimes someone standing over their head with a large stick, that's called a boom pole, and you can point it to whoever's talking. You can also mount it on top of the camera, so if you're doing a sit-down interview and that person is talking towards the camera, it will pick up the sound really well, where sometimes the lavalier microphone will pick up everything in front of it. On professional cameras, you have the ability to use both. On most consumer cameras, you only have one external audio jack, and so I obviously recommend both, but either one is fine if you have a limited budget. The other option or backup option is an onboard microphone. If you are using a flip camera that doesn't have an audio jack, it's really important to remember that the onboard microphone is capturing all of the audio in front of it. It doesn't have the ability to direct where the microphone is going like the shotgun. So if you were to interview someone and you had them standing against a wall, but you wanted to show all of them and you wanted them to talk to the camera, and you're standing 20 feet back, you're not going to hear that person, and you're going to wonder why your audio was so muffled. So when you're using those types of cameras, the closer you are to the subject, the better, so you can get better audio. Okay, so there's a question about what if the mic is integrated as in a flip camera? Can you use a more directed mic? So yes and no. You can also get an external audio recorder and sync the sound up later. There's a program, and I'll remember to put this on the site after the webinar, called Pluralize, which allows you to sync your audio. Honestly, I recommend, if you have another option, to try to find a camera that has the ability to capture audio separately. But you can still definitely make the audio work on a flip. It's all about where you stand next to the person and how quiet your environment is. So if you're shooting in a loud party and you're interviewing someone in the middle of the party, that's probably not the most ideal place. You're going to want to take them into a separate room where it's quiet and see the party in the background. I hope that answers your question. The second is, if your camera allows you to plug in a headphone jack, you should have a set of headphones so you can listen to the audio. Additional gear you're going to need, and which you might already have, are lights, tripod. Now, one thing about the lights, most of you are going to be using available light, and when I mean lights, I don't mean a $2,000 lighting kit. What I mean is taking a lamp and putting it in front of the person so you can use the light from that lamp to help light their face, and we'll get to some example of those later. Tripod, if you haven't purchased a tripod yet, try to find one that has a fluid head, which allows you to pan and tilt with it. And then everyone should have an external hard drive. Josh is going to talk way more in depth about this next week, but the external hard drive is where you're going to keep all your media when you're shooting tapeless. You don't want to you want to keep your media in a safe place, so you want to create a backup before you start editing that you can go back to in case something happens to your project file. Okay, so before we move on to how we're going to really use all of this gear we just talked about, I'm going to open up for some questions. Okay, we did get one question about shooting slow motion, and that's a question that is great for consulting, but it's not going to apply to everyone, and we have a lot to get through, and we have 30 minutes left, so I'm going to keep moving forward. Okay, so first we're going to talk about in filmmaking, and when you're following a subject for a documentary, how do you capture a good interview? How do you make an interview look good? And then we're going to talk about supplementary footage which is sometimes called B-roll, that is going to help visually tell your story besides what we call a talking head interview. Okay, so the first important thing before you start your interview is to find your location. The first thing is, what is this location saying about your subject? If you're interviewing a teacher, perhaps you want to interview them in a classroom. If you're interviewing a rabbi, maybe you want to interview him in his study. What is the surroundings around them going to say? If you're interviewing the rabbi, you probably don't want to put him in the gymnasium unless he has sports as a hobby. Same thing with using a background. Using a background is fine if you want to use a white, black, or colored curtain background, but remember, that really doesn't say a lot about your character. Another thing, once you found your ideal background that says something about your character, is it a quiet environment? Is it an environment that you can control? Can you, if it's really bright and the windows are too bright, can you put sheets up over the windows and no one will get mad at you? Do you have the room for a long enough time that you're not going to be interrupted? You should try to book out a room for 2 hours. If there is other noise, such as a refrigerator or an intercom or phones in the room, do you have the ability to turn those off so you're not interrupted when the interview begins? Also, backgrounds that have color are really preferred because, again, it lightens a person up, makes them look happy. Choosing your frame. We're going to go into more detail about this, and all of these actually have following slides. So you're going to choose your frame. You're going to think about how you're going to light your subject. We're going to learn how to set white balance focus in your iris. We're going to learn how to check audio levels, and then how to interact with your subject. You need to prep them, have them sign a release, and make sure everyone turns their cell phones off. So, framing. The first thing to think about with framing is don't place your subject close to the wall. This is the most common mistake I find when I go and teach people in a class. The first thing is they want to say, well, there's too much going on in the background, so I'm just going to place my subject right up against the wall, and it's white, and it looks nice and professional. No, it doesn't. It makes your subject look flat, and it doesn't say anything about them. Most of the time, if you look at an interview, behind the scenes, a person's sitting in the middle of a room. So it can help give a good amount of depth of field, so there can be some interesting things in the background. And so, and then the lighting can also be controlled, and they can look dimensional rather than flat. So you can see on the left, she's sitting on a couch against the wall. She's really dark, and this room has windows, so she shouldn't be dark. And then we pulled her forward on the other image on the right, and she's sitting in a chair more in the middle of the room, and there's more space behind her. It's not the most interesting background, but it's a better way to use that space. Another thing with framing is to think about your shot size. The traditional interview is the one on the bottom left, which is a medium close-up. Then the medium wide shot you can see on the top of the right of the frame is a medium wide shot, and that is a little bit more of his body. You can see his elbows and a little bit more that he's sitting in a chair. And then below that is a close-up. When are these shots appropriate? This is a good question. I find a lot of times people like to do really extreme close-ups on people's face because they want to feel the emotion in what they're talking about. But if they're saying, hi, my name is Stacy Laterman and I'm a producer, why would you need to be that close to that person? It's invasive. And so when your camera shot is the eye for the viewer. So if you're sitting in a room with someone, I want you to turn around and look at them. You're probably not sitting really close where you're only looking at their face. You're sitting far enough away from them where you're seeing their shoulders and their torso, and that's natural for your eye. So think about that. Close-ups are good, but close-ups, save them for appropriate content. If someone's talking about something emotional, if they're talking about something insightful, if they found the meaning of life, yeah, let's get close up to them then. So think about how you're using the shots. If you're starting with a medium close-up and you want to push in closer, remember to do this when you're asking the question, not when the person's talking. Because that way, if you want to jump from soundbite to soundbite in post, you'll have more flexibility. and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Okay, we're going to pause 1 second for a poll here. The poll question is, what type of videos have you created if you have created them? This is good. There's a nice variety here. A lot of you have done basic videos, some of you have done none, and then a few of you have worked with professional firms as well. Okay, so the other thing with framing, you'll notice if you look where it says best on the bottom left-hand corner, that's the frame we were looking at earlier for medium close-up. These lines here are representing the rule of thirds. If you ever taken a photo class or a photography class or a painting class or a video class, everyone talks about the rule of thirds. It's the idea that centering someone miscellaneous in a camera is not pleasing to the eye. Our eye divides things up in thirds, and it's looking at objects kind of in chunks and pasting them together. So to make someone look interesting, the best idea is to look at the two lines that are going parallel, vertical, sorry, lost my words. They're going vertically and not horizontally first. You want to frame the person, you want to imagine that in your frame, that they are in between one of those lines, like our subject is here. If you look right over to the right and up, you'll see where he's centered in the frame. It's not very interesting there. It's kind of awkward. If we frame him more to the left where that vertical line is, or to the right of the vertical line, and if he was looking the other direction, it looks like you're having a conversation with him. And then the same thing with if you're looking directly to the right, the one that says looking off screen, he's framed correctly, but his eye line where he's looking is to the edge of the frame. So to the left of him, there's all this empty space. And what does all that empty space mean? It says nothing. So you want his presence or your interview subject to fill the screen. His eyes are looking, and the best example again, his eyes are looking at you, the interviewer. He's filling that empty space to the right because his presence is pulling you in. And then we have a little bit of nice framing to the left that gives him a little bit of context as well. So again, try to think of this grid in your mind. The horizontal lines give you a guide of where are you cutting the person off. If you're going to a close-up, you don't want to cut them off right at the neckline. That would look weird because then you have a part of their neck. That's not how an eye naturally frames a subject. Another thing to think about is make sure there isn't too much headroom or too little headroom. Here, our subject, she's pretty, she looks nice, she's lit a little dark, but if you look above where her head is, halfway through the frame, there's all this room at the top. Someone framed this in because they thought it was important to have that photo behind her or that chart, but it really isn't. It doesn't say anything about her. She feels really small and minute, and I'm not having an engaging conversation with her as a viewer. Okay, we have 2 questions. 1 second. Does this take on framing apply exclusively to a talking head interview? No, we're going to show some examples of B-roll and how framing should always be in your mind when you're shooting everything else. And even when you're doing a stand-up interview on the fly, let's say you're at an event, you're at a school rally, and you want to grab a kid and ask him a question, you always want to make sure you frame it up. Everything you do should be framed properly. Okay, and the next question is a good segue into what I'm going to talk about, and it's, is it best to have the person looking at you versus looking at the camera directly? Our recommendation is to always have the person look at you. This is because someone looking directly at a camera is delivering a direct message about something. It's a awkward conversation, and it's also hard when you do an interview and you tell your subject, hey, I want to have you look directly in the lens. That person, when they're talking, unless they have media training, will be a little stunned. And they won't have any reaction because they're looking at a lens. So to get a more natural interview, it's always better to have them look at you and have to have a face-to-face interaction just like you were having a conversation. These 2 pictures here actually are showing good examples of how you want to set up an interview from behind the scenes. The one on the left is a standing interview. As you can see to the far left Our subject there is very tall. He's actually 6'4". And I'm standing in the middle there. I'm the interviewer, and I'm 5 foot. So I'm standing on 2 platforms, so I can be at eye level with him, because otherwise he was looking down at me, which looked really weird, and it looked like we were trying to tell our audience he was a very authoritative figure. So it's important to always make sure you're at the same eye length of that person. And then our cameraman, who's all the way to the right, is almost directly behind me. So we're tricking the viewer. He's not looking directly at the camera. He's looking at me, but his eye line is just a little bit off to the right. So if we go back to the previous slide, this one, you can see at the best version on the lower left-hand corner that he's looking just to the right of the camera. And he's not looking way off to the right. The interviewer is not sitting way off to the right. They're not sitting directly behind it, but just to the right. One second here. Okay, and then our sit-down interview to the right, you can see that I'm sitting, our eye lines, he's looking to the right of the camera, and I'm to the right of the camera, and the camera's right to the left of my head. It's almost like my head, if I move it to the right, is going to hit the camera. That's how close you want to be to the camera, so it looks natural and not like they're talking to someone off in the distance. Is there any questions on that? This is really important to practice, by the way. Everything we're talking about, practice, practice, practice makes perfect. Sometimes I don't practice, and then I look at something I've done when I review the footage, and I say, oh, why didn't I practice that? Everything's new all the time in film, so practicing is the most important thing. So set up a fake interview and make sure you understand what I'm talking about with eye line. Where are you going to place the camera? Where are you going to sit? I'm sorry, we had one question. I don't know if I totally understand the question.
Where's your head?
So we will follow up with an email if you have a question. It was about where's my head in the frame. Okay. So what was that next question?
Where does the mic go?
This says, when you do a seated interview, where does the mic go? On the interviewee or just the camera mic? That is a good question. So in both of these examples, we have a boom operator, which most of you will not have. So our interviewee has a lavalier microphone on. Your interviewee will always have a lavalier mic on. And then you can also run the camera mic at the same time to get additional audio if your camera allows you to do that. I never mic the interviewer unless they're part of the story. I know my questions, so when I go into post and I work with an editor, if I'm editing something myself, I don't need to know what I was asking the person. And you'll understand why in a minute when we talk about how to conduct a good interview, because that person is going to tell you what you asked them with their answer. This is just a little bit. I know some people always want to know more about lighting, so I just threw this slide in to talk a little bit about standard 3-point lighting. When you look at a photo, you'll always notice that mainly the brightest thing in an interview is the person's face. So if you look here to the right, it says camera. And then next to it says the key light. That's always your brightest light. So you want to think about that when you're doing an interview. Where's your light coming from? It should be coming from in front of the person, and that's the brightest person. So if you're shooting in a dark classroom and you have no light in there, I recommend taking a light from your office, bringing it in, setting it up by the camera, and shining it on the person so you can at least see their face. The backlight, again, should be your, we're going to look at some examples, but should be your darkest light and your lowest light. It just helps show what's in the background, but your background's always going to be darker than your subject because you want the focus to be on them. And then your fill light is to give a little bit of light on the shoulder, so it gives them some dimension, because if you only have 2 sources of light, sometimes people can fall flat. Again, this is just a little bit of education and background into traditional lighting. But I'm going to move forward because we still have a good amount to cover. Windows. Most of you will be shooting in rooms with windows. And you want to see what's outside because maybe you're in New York City and you want to see the hustle and bustle of the street, or you're in a small rural area and you want to show that your school is nice because there's a lake in the background. Well, if you look at what happens when you shoot someone in front of a window, they will be dark because, like we just talked about, the lightest thing is behind them. So the ideal situation would be is to turn the person around, even though this background's not as pretty, but use that light to light your subject's face. That is one of the, that's probably the second mistake I see a lot in people's footage, is they want to see what's going on outside, but really it's about your subject. So smart filmmaking and experienced filmmaking is about making decisions. What are you going to sacrifice? Do you want to sacrifice your backdrop to seeing someone's face? Do you want to sacrifice your backdrop for better audio because you want to hear what the person's saying and you don't have an external microphone? So these are all kind of things you need to think about when you're filming. As in most situations, even professionally, you can't always have everything in an ideal situation when you're filming a documentary. White balance, most cameras will let you set your white balance. What does white balance mean? It's setting the color of the room you're shooting in to white. So incandescent here has a little bit of a orange hue to it. It's 60 watts. Fluorescent always gives kind of a green, blue type color. So if you're looking at your footage later and you're wondering, why does your subject look a little bit like he might be becoming a Smurf? It's because you didn't set your white balance. And fluorescent, again, this is a different one, is a little bit more yellow. Sunlight is always blue. You'll see the Smurf look in sunlight when you don't white balance. And indoors, your person will look like they've been in a tanning booth too long because it's orange light. So what you'll do, I'm sure all of you are asking, well, how do I set my white balance? Here's what I'm talking about with the Smurf. This is white balance to the left, nice skin tone, green wall. You can see all the true colors. And not white balance. Everything's blue, and he looks like I need to take him to the hospital. How do you set your white balance? In your camera, most of you will have pre-settings that will say daylight, fluorescent, shade, tungsten, which is indoors, cloudy or flash. Just press the setting for which one it is. So if you select daylight and you're shooting outside, you'll get rid of that blue. If you're shooting in tungsten inside and you have that orange on the person, it should balance all of that out. Iris and focus. On the flip cameras, you don't get to adjust either of these, but I just want to go ahead and talk a little bit about them because I know we have a variety of camera users here. Manual focus, if you're going to use it, the best way to use it is to zoom in all the way on the subject's face that you're filming, whether it's an interview or an action, and put that into focus, and then zoom out, and then that will tell your lens where to look. If you have autofocus, it's fine. It will find the focus for you. When you move, it will stay in focus. It's a beautiful thing. Sometimes stylistically, people just want to be able to control their own focus. And then an iris, this is a ring on your camera that helps you with your exposure. So if you're in a room and it looks really dark and you want to make it look a little bit brighter, sometimes you have ability to open that lens up and allow more light in, which will lighten up the whole room. A lot of consumer cameras will have a setting that's called the gain, and the gain is kind of like boosting up your exposure, but when you do that, it does tend to make your image look a little grainier, so that's when you have to decide, do you need to move environments for where you're shooting, or do you just go ahead and deal with the grain of the video? Audio. Cannot express, when talking about interviews, the importance of being in a quiet room. If there's windows in the room, close them. Put drapes over them so you don't hear the outside. If there's someone vacuuming, ask them to turn it off. Common mistakes are air conditionings will turn on in the middle of an interview. Everything will go beautifully, and then you'll hear in your footage, and that's the air conditioner or heater turning on. Cell phone ringing. That happens all the time. Traffic noise. I encourage everyone here, maybe we can just do this as a group, take about 20 seconds of silence and listen to the room you're in and see if it sounds quiet, and see if you can make a list of all the ambient noises you're hearing, which an ambient noise is like air conditioning, a cell phone, or a traffic sound. So I'm going to be quiet and listen to my room. Someone wrote in that they hear the humming of the server. I hear a lot of traffic and I heard some sirens because we're in a very busy neighborhood in the city. Did anyone hear quiet, complete quiet? I hope not. Okay. Again, best practices, if you don't have control, it's no big deal, but try to avoid using your onboard microphone. If you have 2 channels, which allows you to set up a shotgun microphone and a lav, do that. And if you only have 1 channel, use either the lav or the shotgun microphone we were talking about. Most of you will be using a lav, which is a great thing. Check your levels. I encourage everyone to go to their manuals to learn where their level settings are, because every camera is all over the place on where they are, but it will tell you that you'll ask someone to talk, and you'll see a little bar that moves, and you'll see where it peaks and it goes to red. You don't want to have someone go into that red when they're talking, so you're going to adjust your microphone levels so it can be stay in the yellow or the orange or whatever color your camera is using. And this last thing here, record room tone. What is room tone? Room tone is what we were talking about, the ambient noise of a room. When you're going to be editing your video and you're going to be cutting from a teacher talking to a student talking to a parent talking, whatever your story is, they're all probably going to be in different locations. So to make your edits and your cuts in their audio seamlessly as possible, sometimes what you'll do is you'll take that noise of the room, that room presence, and lay it in on another track, which we'll talk about more next week. So it's important to just get that noise without anybody talking. I usually record about a minute of room tone. It's awkward, everyone sits there in silence, but at the end of the day it makes for a better project. Okay, so we've been through a lot. Now that you've found your location, you've framed up where you want your person to be, you've set your white balance, you've lit to the best of your ability, you've set your microphone up, your interview subject is ready. Don't have them come until you're ready, because there's nothing worse than having an impatient interview subject sitting there waiting for you to start. So have them come maybe 5 minutes when you're ready, and you'll say, well, I don't know how tall they are. How do I know if someone's going to sit in that frame? This is why it's good to have a 2-person crew, or have a student with you or a volunteer who can sit in that chair and act like the subject, and then you can make last-minute tweaks when they come and sit down. Again, have them sign a release if they haven't. Have a glass of water for them. It's very important. People, when they start to talk, get very dry, and they'll start to cough, and having some water on spot is smart. Direct them to look at you and not the camera if that's how you've decided to shoot and how we recommend that you shoot. And they'll ask that. Usually most people jump the gun and get to it before you do. You can prep them on what you want them to talk about, which you've probably have already done in your pre-interviews. And remind them to speak in full sentences and to repeat the question back to you in their answer. So someone had the question earlier of, do you mic the interviewer so you can hear the question? Well, if I were to say to someone, can you tell me your name? I would tell them, don't just say Stacy Laterman, say, my name is Stacy Laterman. So then that way I'm talking in a full sentence and I'm answering the question they talked about. Or, why did you choose to come to this school? You wouldn't just say, because it's fun and I love the teachers. You would say, I've chosen to come to this school because I really enjoy the way the teachers interact with the students. So you can coach them along, and if they don't answer that way, feel free to say, that was a great answer, but do you mind just putting it in a full sentence or saying something along these lines? And the most important is relax, have fun. There are no wrong answers, because people get very nervous when they talk in front of a camera, and they'll say, can you edit this, can you do that, and just tell them, relax and have fun. And again, this is just repeating what we talked about. Change the shot sizes while the questions are being asked. If a subject forgets to refer to what they're talking about, ask them to restate it. And if you hear an ambulance or an intercom go off, just hold for that noise if it's something you can't control, and then have them start repeating the sentence again. Because again, the worst thing is when you get to cutting this in post and you hear that ambulance in the background and that person saying the soundbite you've always dreamed of, you're going to be really mad you didn't ask them to repeat it. It's happened to me, trust me. So, you've conducted the interviews. Now what? Does anyone have any questions about interviews before I move on to B-roll, supplementary storytelling B-roll? we talked a little bit last week about getting B-roll, getting shots that are relevant to what you're talking about. But how do you get those shots successfully is what we're going to talk about. Sometimes, if you're working with photos, that's totally fine. If you're working with existing footage that you already have, that's good as well. So what we're talking about is when you have the time to go and shoot this yourself. These shots here are all shots that will help you edit together a scene in post-production that will bring a person into your story. Again, we don't want that talking head. We don't want to just tell them how great the classroom is and how great of a teacher that teacher is when they read to the students. We want to see it. So here are a list of 7 shots that you should think about getting when you're filming a scene. I just also want to say that if you sign up for consulting with Danny Alpert or myself, and we're going to ask you, what are you going to film to show your story? And you're going to say, I'm going to film a classroom. We're going to ask you, how many shots are you going to get in that classroom and how are you going to film them? So the list is here: establishing wide shot, action medium shot, over-the-shoulder shots, cutaways, linking shots, close-up and listening shots. I have examples of all of these. So this first one, our example here is a video that we worked on dealing with preschoolers in Chicago, and this is a scene of a teacher reading to the students. So to the left, we have an establishing shot of what the school looks like. To the right, we have an establishing shot of the classroom. They're wide shots. They're telling us where we're at. Next, we have an establishing wide shot of the scene we're going to focus in on. We're at this location in Chicago in this classroom with this teacher. So you can see how those images are starting to paint the story for us. Next, we're going to get deeper in. We're going to go to a close-up of who our main subject is. That's the teacher. She's reading to the children. Okay? Then we have some listening shots. We go around from the teacher, and you can see that these children are engaged and they're listening to what the teacher has to say. It's always good to get a couple listening shots of different subjects. An action medium shot. We're looking from behind the teacher. We're looking at all the kids. They're sitting there playing, being happy. Well, one kid kind of looks bored, but, there's always the one. Cutaways. What is a cutaway? A cutaway is a cutaway to an image of something that's relevant to the scene. The parent board on the right is not as relevant as on the left we have some kids drawing. So we're showing that this is a nurturing teacher, a nurturing environment. So if the scene of the audio of what the teacher's talking about is going longer and we've exhausted all of our other B-roll, we can always cut to images that show what a classroom looks like. And then we just got one question that says, is an establishing wide shot is still photo? No, you can do video of an establishing wide shot. In fact, if you have a photo, that's absolutely fine. But if you're going to shoot a wide shot, sometimes it's a little more dynamic to have cars going by in front or see someone walking into the building or walking out of the classroom, and you can have some action in that shot. Shots that have action in them are always better. Since we're doing a GoToWebinar, I chose to use still images to show what I'm talking about because sometimes video speeds don't keep up on everybody's internet connections. And I can post some more examples after this of actual video examples. And this is our linking shot. I did the best to show this in action. If you start from the top left, you have 2 kids. They're obviously listening to something going on. The camera starts to move up. It shows that the teacher's talking. She's pointing at something, and then you have the board of what they're looking at. So you're linking your teacher's your main subject, but you're linking the kids to that teacher, showing what they're doing. It's an action shot. So as you can see, if you're to say, well, I'm just going to go film the classroom, that's not good enough for a shot list. You need to show, I'm going to do a wide shot, a medium shot. I'm going to cover all of the actioning that's happening, so when I go to edit, I can show what this actually looks like instead of just one wide shot of kids listening to a book being read. Some pointers when you're shooting these types of shots in B-roll: hold your shot. Hold your shot for 10 seconds. I can't stress this enough. Practice, practice, practice holding a steady shot. Count to 10 seconds in your head. It's going to seem like forever, But really, only 4 seconds of that shot will probably be usable, and that's why it's important to hold it for 10 seconds. Plus, if you have a soundbite and a cut in post, which you'll see next week, sometimes you're going to need a shot that's a little bit longer than just 2 seconds to be able to cover the length of what someone's talking about. If you're filming handheld, and if you're filming on a flip especially, make sure to support yourself and use your core. What do I mean? Make a human tripod. When you stand, you should stand with your legs shoulder length apart. You should have your arms into your body, your elbows almost touching your sides, and then hold the camera with both hands. This is steady. Don't stand with your feet together or on 2 different planes and hold with one arm and twist your torso and be like, I'm doing a panning shot. It will be very shaky, and you'll be upset that you didn't take the time to stabilize and practice your shot. If you have a tripod, always use your tripod. It guarantees you'll be stable, especially with interviews. Use a tripod. Avoid zoom. Zooming on handheld shots makes shaky footage. If you want to get close into your subject, physically get closer to them with the camera. Most of you are filming in very safe environments where you work. So if you have a kid who's writing on a piece of paper during a class or reading their music book and you want to see what they're taking notes on, don't zoom in from all the way back in the camera and have a shaky shot and it looks like, we're spying on this kid. Walk up, ask them, hey, would you mind? I'm just going to film a couple things here, and take some close-up shots of what they're doing. Again, the camera is the window to the viewer. If a viewer sees something close up in real life, they're standing close to it. They're not zooming into it with their eyes. And we had just got another question. Someone just asked for B-roll shots. Is it more common to just do handheld for all of them? It is more common because a lot of it is you want to be action and moving, but you just need to remember to breathe and find what shot you're going for. So once you have it framed up, once you say, okay, I'm going to come in close to this kid that's reading a piece of sheet music and I want to film that sheet music and get a close-up, I'm going to take a deep breath, I'm going to hold my arms in, and I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to hold it for 10 seconds. And then I got to remember that maybe I want to show that this kid's engaged. So I'm going to tilt up, and I'm going to do a couple of practice tilts to get my movement down and link that piece of music to that child. All right. The other most important thing here, and it's all the way at the bottom, but it should be at the top, sound. Sound, sound, sound. Even if you don't have a lav on someone and you're using the onboard microphone, if you have a teacher reading and interacting with kids like that scene we just looked at, you want to hear the audio of what they're saying. Maybe they're saying something that you can use to help tell your story. Maybe the book they're reading is relevant to what you want to say. A good example of this is I was actually shooting in a hospital a couple weeks ago, and we couldn't film the patients because of HIPAA and privacy, of course. And the camera operator turned off the camera, but there was some amazing sound we didn't get, and we should have kept the camera running because we had one of the nurses that we were filming say, this man just fell off a 20-feet building. We need to get him back to the ER right now. That little soundbite could have been the window into a very compelling and dynamic story about all the crazy patients that this nurse is always having to deal with. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about sound and making sure you're just always getting audio and it's not just the person explaining, it's the audio that's happening at the moment as well? I realize we're running a little over here, and I just want to thank everyone for being patient. We're wrapping up here in a moment. As you can see, there's a lot to get through, and I'm talking very fast. So wrapping up, before you're ready to take a nap after your long day, remember to store your gear in a safe place. Don't throw it in the back of your car. Don't put it in your kid's book bag by accident, forget about it, or leave it in your purse. Treat your gear with respect because it is helping you tell the story you want to tell. Also, put your batteries on a charger. If you're using AA batteries, make sure you have a pair of fresh batteries for the next shoot. The worst thing is to show up on shoot and not have charged battery. Same thing, make sure your tapes or your SD cards are labeled. If you're importing the media that night, which we'll talk about next week, make sure you're labeling those folders correctly. And the most important thing with anything, practice makes perfect. Before you go on your next shoot day, look at the footage. It always looks different when you look on your computer and when you're not in the moment. Take a couple days off, go back, look at the footage and say, wow, that looks great. That's really how I was going to look. I did it. Or say, next time I'm going to pay more attention. I sacrificed my audio quality here, but really that might not have been the best decision. I needed to look better. Or I need a better audio and for them not to look so great. So all of these things, looking at your footage, taking notes, and continuing to learn on what makes good images and what type of images make a good story. I can tell you all the professionals I work with do it all the time, and we're constantly learning as well, and it's something you all can do. Just spend a little bit of time looking at it so you can constantly improve upon it. Additional resources. I love all these websites. Mandy.com has great links to different crews and what's going on in your areas. CreativeCow.net is a forum where you can pretty much ask any question and it will be answered. You can also search a database. Guarantee all the questions you probably have already been asked, so you can see how people responded to them. Lowell.com, edu. Lowell is a lighting company. So that little diagram I spent about 5 seconds on talking about important lighting, if you want to get a better visual understanding or you want to go more depth into that, they have an awesome online tutorial and they have really good visuals to explain how to use lighting to paint a picture. And then, of course, the AVI CHAI video page. We're going to have this lecture up there. I have a little booklet that I've made for people to bring the set with them of reminders of things to capture, and a shot list form and post-production forms, and all of that is there. There's also going to be additional links there for Vimeo, Video School, and some other things. So we're pretty much out of time here, but I wish I had time to answer everybody's questions. Please sign up for a consultation with myself or someone else, and we can answer the more specific questions that you have. Check out dayschoolvideoacademy.org when you have a moment. Make sure you register for next week's training, which is webinar and post-production. Again, pre-production and storytelling, production, post-production, distribution, all to go together, and to really complete the whole deal, it's good to attend this. Sign up for the consultation and learn about the contest, all the prizes that we're giving out. We're going to do one last poll before we sign off here. And the question is, do you plan on entering the video contest? Which I hope all of you are planning on entering the video contest, because I know you all can do this, and I look forward to seeing everyone. Maybe. Change those maybes to yes. Okay. Thank you all again so much. I hope this was informative and useful, and that you all are excited to go pick up a camera and start practicing. Thank you so much.